Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? It is, as always, so very good to be here. I'm always really thankful, especially on a beautiful morning like today, and on a day when we're getting extra daylight, and it's just so gorgeous outside. So thanks for spending a little bit of time inside together this morning. This is really lovely. It's always just really beautiful to be here with you. A few years ago, I had the great privilege of co-leading a book study on Barbara Brown Taylor's book, Walking in the Dark. If you're not familiar with this book, Barbara tells this story. She's previously told journeys of leaving her church life and re-entering it in a different way. So she talks about leaving city life and moving to a rural community and what it's like to move away from all the kind of hullabaloo, the city lights and the noise that we become accustomed to when we live in more urban areas. And she connects this with her faith. She talks about how we live in a time of solar spirituality, when we focus on the bright parts of our lives, and certainly that's very true in a social media age, but that really there is a richness to the dark parts as well, and that we shouldn't be afraid of those, that God is there with us also. And while that is a really solid idea, it can be very painful and difficult to live out. Certainly we've all had moments in our lives when loneliness crept in, or fear, or one of those darker emotions that we might not care for so much. But God made us as these full and complete beings with a whole range of emotions, a whole palette of colors to draw upon in order to make us who we are. There is a television show out right now called Lock and Key. It's a children's television show. It follows these siblings as they sort of traverse a mystery in this new home that their family has moved into. And the middle child, the sister, undertakes the notion that if she could rid herself of fear, that she would be much better off, that she would be happier, that she would get along with people more, that she would be able to connect to people better. So because it's a children's television show, she does just this. She gets rid of her fear. And at first it's a lot of fun. She's able to get up and dye her hair and put on loud music and make her family breakfast. And she feels like she's finally healed herself by overcoming this fearful part of her personality. But as the show progresses, as time goes on, we see that what the downside of that is that she is more reckless, that she puts the people she loves into jeopardy because she lacks the caution she needs in order to connect with the healing she had to uncover from the fearful parts of her personality. So even the most uncomfortable parts of ourselves are worth exploring. We certainly don't have to explore them alone. And that's the text that we have today. All of the lectionary texts for today at this journey point in our Lenten season are about journeying of some sort, that we are in process, that we are progressing somewhere, and that we don't have to do that alone. So we have Nicodemus, a leader, a Pharisee, coming to Jesus at night and asking for help. The commentaries I reviewed hypothesized that Nicodemus came to Jesus at night because he was too embarrassed to come during the day. But I would like to propose that maybe he comes at night because that's when he is most restless. I know for me that can be very true, that the day can be going very well when I'm engaging with others. The sun is out and there's a lot to do, but if something's really weighing on my heart or my mind, it's usually when I lay down at night that it really makes itself known. And that, for me as well, is oftentimes when I find myself going to Jesus in prayer for conversation, for guidance, for understanding of what's happening, and for peace so that I can get some rest and get up again the next day. And this conversation that Nicodemus has with Jesus is a very literal one. And perhaps in my experience in church life over many years of growing up in the church, it's that Nicodemus sort of gets dismissed as missing the point. He's not getting it. But I think in reality, here we have Nicodemus coming to Jesus with his questions, which is the very point of getting it. We all have these questions in our lives, these dark parts that don't make a lot of sense. And the hardest and heaviest thing can be when you think it should be other than it is. There is a heaviness to feeling like we don't understand something we should have already gotten. It can be, from a very young age, if you're in class and you feel like the question you have is a stupid question, but really there are no stupid questions. And what I've learned is that usually if I have a question, others in the room have it as well. And it can progress throughout our lives. When we see that family seems to go so smoothly for others, or if we have a sense that finances are not hard for other people. Hopefully over time, and in such a loving community such as this one, we start to understand that our human frailties and confusions are what connect us and not what divide us. But it's the point where the crack in the base is where the light gets through, so to speak, and how we know one another better and more richly. And so Nicodemus comes to Jesus with this question about being born again. And Jesus very patiently sits with him and answers his question. I'd like to imagine that maybe Jesus was expecting Nicodemus, was not surprised by this calling, because I really like to believe that, as Pastor Joyce Meyer says, God knew what he was getting when he got us, that we're not a surprise to God. So certainly Nicodemus was no surprise to Jesus on that night. And when the conversation turns to being born again, Nicodemus, in all his literalism, wants to figure it out. And certainly we are a people who like to figure it out, like to take things apart, put them back together, like to strike out with new theories and understandings, like a gardening season that goes as planned, like a road trip that goes as we expect it to. The uneventful moments are where our life fits. It's where the puzzle pieces click into place. But if we didn't happen upon something confusing or uncomfortable, it is unlikely that we would ever grow. I would very much like growth to be comfortable and accommodating, just as much as I would like chocolate to be a healthy food to eat every day. For whatever reason, it's a little bit of a stretch for us that causes us to be someone new. And so when Jesus answers Nicodemus, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about becoming someone new. That our family who births us and raises us shapes us, of course, but there's this spiritual dimension to our life that we cannot quite see and we cannot quite touch. Working in the fields of chaplaincy and pastoral counseling, I have grown a bit weary of hearing that spirituality is not something that can be known or measured, which is a common claim. And I think really and truly there is a way to know and see spirituality, but we're just not able to do it yet. But we can feel it. We can know when we feel connected in the presence of someone else, when a story touches us, when it seems like, as the worship service has invited us to do today, we have the blessed assurance that God's breath is upon us and that our life is about something new. So what happens to Nicodemus? Where does he go from this story? Well, we see Nicodemus pop up in the Gospel of John a couple of other times. And I think most notably, he comes in another dark time. He comes after the death of Jesus. He's there with Joseph of Arimathea, with the myrrh and the anointing oils necessary to prepare Jesus. So in this night season, when he comes to Jesus, in his own night season, he revisits Jesus at the end of his own life in another time of great darkness. Because really, it's the people who can sit with you in the dark that are the most precious ones, right? It's the people who can weather the hardest storms with you, or even the people who, if someone you love dearly has to step away because they're so overwhelmed, but they come back and they own that. They're real with you and they apologize for the times that they got it wrong. That's a real spiritual friend. That's a real kinship and connection that we have the gift to share. In the healthcare world, there's a term known as a doula. It's someone who sits with a woman at the time of childbirth and welcomes this new person into the world by assisting the mom and tending to her needs. There's also something known as an anamkara, a spiritual friend at the end of life, someone who sits with a person who's dying and helps them go back to where we came from. We have these spiritual dimensions that mark the beginning and the end of our life, and they're so similar for all of us that we mark them so clearly. But there's so many different ways to be a person. There's so many different ways to live a good life. And so sometimes it's up to us to find ways to celebrate our relationships, to mark the rituals, and to highlight the things that make us feel most joyful, especially when we feel so put upon and lost at times. This Lenten season is a time of gathering and remembering who we are. One of my favorite songs comes from the band Journey, and it's Don't Stop Believin'. And it's because that first line, just a small town girl, always gets my attention. I turn the radio up, I roll the windows down, I'm in the moment, I am that small town girl. I don't like to think that I'm living in a lonely world, but Steve Perry gets my attention, and I'm there for the whole song. And it's such an awesome song to turn up loud and listen to and feel in your bones. But it's really this song about people connecting at night. It's people who feel lost and disparate coming together. He ends the song with streetlight people. And I think for the longest time I thought he was talking about what he saw. He sees streetlights and he sees people because they're out at night. But I thought, what if we're called upon to be streetlight people? What if we're called upon to be the people who give light at night in the darkest corners and shadows where nobody else really wants to go, where nobody else really wants to be? We stand there and we shine our light. Now we're people, of course. We're flawed, we make mistakes. Sometimes we need to take a break and let someone else shine. But the song ends with Don't Stop Believin', hold on to that feeling. So when you feel the darkness contrasted with the beautiful spring season that we're entering, remember the bright spots. Remember the streetlight people who came into your own life and encouraged you to keep on, keeping on when it was the hardest. And remember that just like Nicodemus, sometimes we have to go to Jesus in the darkest of night, but that builds the truest and best relationship for us moving forward into the fullness of life that God has given us to live each and every day.